Sometimes the most dangerous fight isn't the one in the ring, it's the one that finds you when you least expect it. The musty concrete walls of Castellano's boxing gym on Pier 47 had witnessed countless battles, but nothing like what was about to unfold on this storm-lashed October evening. Muhammad Ali Hassan wrapped his hands with methodical precision, his calloused fingers moving through the ritual that had become sacred to him over 8 years of underground fighting. Rain hammered the corrugated roof above as he prepared for the biggest bout of his career, a championship fight that could finally lift his family out of the shadows of poverty and fear. But Ali carried secrets heavier than his 185-pound frame. His immigration papers were forged, his real name was Mahmoud al-Rashid, and his mother lay dying in a cramped apartment 3 blocks away, too afraid to seek medical help. When 3 NYPD badges flashed in his doorway that night, Ali knew his carefully constructed life was about to crumble. Detective Frank Caruso's voice cut through the storm's fury like a blade. "Kid, we've got a proposition for you." What happened next would defy explanation and haunt everyone involved. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ali's fingers stilled on the hand wraps as Detective Caruso stepped into the cramped locker room, his bulk filling the doorway like a storm cloud. Water dripped from his navy coat onto the cracked concrete floor, each drop echoing in the sudden silence. Behind him, 2 younger detectives flanked the entrance, one Asian with nervous eyes, the other Hispanic with scarred knuckles that told their own story about life on Brooklyn's streets. "Mind if we come in?" Caruso asked, though he was already inside, his pale eyes scanning the room with practiced assessment. "Looks like you're getting ready for something big tonight." Ali resumed wrapping his hands, forcing his breathing to stay steady. 8 years of underground fighting had taught him to read danger the way other men read newspapers, and every instinct screamed that this wasn't a social call. "Gym's closed to spectators," he said, his voice carrying the faint accent he'd never quite shaken. "Fight doesn't start for another hour." Caruso's laugh was like gravel in a cement mixer. "Oh, we're not here to watch, kid. We're here to talk business." He nodded to his partners, who moved to positions blocking the small window and secondary exit. Professional, coordinated. Ali had seen this formation before, in his nightmares about immigration raids. "I pay my gym fees," Ali said, testing the tension on his wraps. "Got my permits for the bout." "Permits." The detective rolled the word around like it tasted bitter. "Funny thing about permits, Muhammad, or should I say Mahmoud." The name hit Ali's chest like a body shot, stealing his breath for a split second. Caruso's smile widened at the reaction. "Yeah, we know all about your little identity crisis. Amazing what turns up when you run prints through the right databases." The Asian detective, Torres, according to his badge, shifted uncomfortably near the window. "Frank, maybe we should..." "Maybe we should what, Vincent?" Caruso's voice carried a warning. "Maybe we should let this illegal alien collect his purse tonight while his dying mother takes up space in our emergency rooms?" His attention returned to Ali with laser focus. "See, that's the beautiful thing about immigrants. You people understand consequences better than most Americans. You know what happens when the wrong people start asking the right questions." Ali's mother's face flashed through his mind, her hollow cheeks, the way she'd gripped his hand that morning while struggling to breathe. The antibiotics alone cost more than most fighters made in a month, and the experimental treatment in Manhattan might as well have been on the moon for all their chances of affording it. This fight, this one opportunity against Tony the Sledge Marconi, represented everything. His mother's life, their future, their chance to finally step out of the shadows. "What do you want?" The question came out rougher than Ali intended. Caruso reached into his coat and produced a thick manila envelope, setting it on the wooden bench beside Ali's water bottle. "Simple transaction. You take a dive tonight, 3rd round, make it look good, and this little immigration problem disappears. 20,000 in cash, plus we make sure your mother gets moved to the front of the line at Mount Sinai. Private room, best doctor's money can buy." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in like a closing fist. Ali stared at the envelope, calculating quickly. 20,000 was more than he'd make in 2 years of fighting. Even if he won every bout, his mother could get the surgery she needed, the medication that might buy her years instead of months. "And if I win?" Ali asked, though he already knew the answer. The third detective spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a thick Brooklyn accent. "Then you become a very interesting person to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Amazing how fast they work when they get anonymous tips about illegal aliens profiting from criminal enterprises." His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Your ma gets shipped back to Lebanon in a pine box, if she's lucky enough to survive the flight." Ali's hands began to shake, not from fear but from a rage so pure it felt like electricity in his veins. These men, these supposed protectors of justice, were willing to destroy everything he'd built, everything he'd sacrificed for, just to rig one fight. The storm outside seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. "How much is Marconi paying you?" Ali asked quietly. Caruso's expression hardened. "Wrong question, kid. The right question is, how much is your mother's life worth?" He tapped the envelope. "Because this offer expires when that bell rings for the first round." Ali stood slowly, his wrapped hands hanging at his sides like weapons waiting to be deployed. At 6'1", he was taller than all three detectives, and years of training had carved his body into something resembling a classical sculpture. But size and skill meant nothing against badges and immigration laws. "I need to think about it," he said finally. Caruso checked his watch, a gold Rolex that probably cost more than Ali's annual rent. "You've got 30 minutes. We'll be watching from ringside." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mohammed, don't do anything stupid. We'd hate for this to get complicated." The three detectives filed out like a plague leaving Egypt, their footsteps echoing down the concrete hallway until only the storm's fury remained. Ali stood frozen in the sudden silence, staring at the manila envelope as if it might explode. $20,000, his mother's life, everything he'd worked for, reduced to a choice between corruption and survival. He sank back onto the bench, his wrapped hands trembling as he reached for his water bottle. The plastic crinkled under his grip, and for a moment he imagined it was Caruso's throat. 8 years. 8 years of building this life from nothing, of transforming Mahmoud Hassan, scared refugee boy, into Muhammad Ali Hassan, underground boxing champion of Brooklyn's forgotten districts. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. He remembered his first week in America, sleeping on the floor of a cousin's Sunset Park apartment, listening to his mother cough through the thin walls while he studied English phrases on index cards by streetlight. "My name is Muhammad. I am from Brooklyn. I am American." The lies had felt foreign on his tongue then, but repetition had made them almost true. Almost. His phone buzzed against the bench. A text from his trainer, Sal Kozlowski, who'd become more father figure than coach over the years. "Crowd's getting restless." "You good, kid?" Sal was probably pacing outside the locker room right now, knowing better than to disturb a fighter's pre-bout ritual but worrying anyway. The old Polish boxer had taken Ali under his wing when nobody else would train an illegal immigrant with more heart than experience. Ali typed back, 5 minutes. But his fingers hesitated over the send button. What would Sal say if he knew? The old man had spent 40 years in boxing, had seen every kind of corruption the sport could offer. He'd left a professional circuit in 1973 after witnessing a fixed championship bout, swearing he'd never again be part of a system that sold its soul for profit. That's why he'd gravitated toward the underground scene, raw, honest, brutal in its purity. Win or lose based on skill and heart, not on who'd greased the right palms. Sal treated these warehouse fights like religious ceremonies, and his fighters like congregation members seeking salvation through sweat and blood. The envelope seemed to pulse on the bench beside him, a malignant heartbeat in his peripheral vision. Ali forced himself to look away, focusing instead on the photographs Sal had taped to his locker, images that told the story of his ordinary world, his everything worth losing. His mother at 18, radiant in a wedding dress that had been reduced to ash when Israeli bombs hit their neighborhood in Beirut. She'd been a literature professor then, fluent in 4 languages, respected and admired. Now she cleaned office buildings at night when her lungs allowed it, her brilliant mind trapped in a body that betrayed her a little more each day. Beside it, a Polaroid from his first amateur bout 3 years ago. Ali barely recognized the scared kid in the photo, all elbows and awkward footwork. But Sal was there in the corner, grinning like a proud father, and the joy on both their faces was genuine, pure. That fight had earned Ali $17 and a black eye that lasted 2 weeks, but it had also given him something he'd never had before, a sense of belonging. The third photo showed his morning routine, the real Muhammad Ali Hassan, not the fighter or the frightened illegal immigrant, just a son making breakfast for his mother in their cramped studio apartment. Scrambled eggs with sumac, the way she'd taught him during their first winter in America, when they had nothing but hope and each other. She'd been stronger then, able to work double shifts at the laundromat while he attended night school and trained at Sal's gym. Those mornings had become sacred to him. The way she hummed old Arabic lullabies while braiding her graying hair, how she insisted on reading him passages from Khalil Gibran's The Prophet over coffee, her voice still carrying echoes of the professor she'd once been. "Your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding," she'd recited just that morning, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove. The envelope caught his eye again, and Ali felt something crack inside his chest. Caruso was right about one thing: immigrants understood consequences. Every decision carried the weight of deportation, of losing everything in a single bureaucratic stroke, but they also understood sacrifice in ways that born citizens never could. His mother had given up her country, her career, her very identity to give him a chance at something better. What would she say if she knew he was considering throwing that chance away? Not for money or comfort, but for her life. The ultimate cosmic joke. Save the woman who'd sacrificed everything for his integrity by sacrificing his integrity for her. Thunder crashed overhead, and Ali realized he'd been sitting in the locker room for 25 minutes. 5 minutes left to choose between the man he was and the man he might have to become. He stood, legs unsteady, and reached for the envelope. His fingers had just brushed the envelope's edge when the locker room door burst open with enough force to rattle the metal frame. Ali spun around, expecting to see Caruso returning to collect his answer, but instead found himself face to face with a woman he'd never seen before. She was maybe 30, with olive skin and sharp cheekbones that spoke of Mediterranean ancestry. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and despite the storm raging outside, her charcoal blazer was bone dry. What struck Ali most was her eyes, deep brown, intelligent, and burning with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Mr. Hassan," she said, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. "We need to talk." Ali's hand froze inches from the envelope. "Lady, I don't know who you are, but fighters get privacy before—" "My name is Agent Sophia Reyes, Internal Affairs Bureau." She produced a badge from her jacket, the gold shield catching the fluorescent light. "And I know exactly what just happened in this room." The words hit Ali like a sledgehammer to the solar plexus. Internal Affairs, the cops who investigated other cops. His mind raced through the implications. If Aya was already watching Caruso, then this whole setup might be even more dangerous than he'd realized. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ali said. But his voice lacked conviction. He was a fighter, not an actor. Agent Reyes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Detective Frank Caruso, Detective Vincent Torres, Detective Michael O'Brien. They left this room 6 minutes ago after offering you $20,000 to throw your fight against Anthony Marconi. She gestured at the envelope. That money is evidence of criminal conspiracy, racketeering, and abuse of authority. Ali felt the walls closing in again, but this time the pressure came from all directions. "You were listening? We've been building a case against Caruso for 18 months, she said, moving closer. "Extortion, evidence tampering, witness intimidation. But we've never caught him in the act before. You could be the key to putting him away for life." The locker room suddenly felt like the center of a hurricane, too quiet, too still, while chaos swirled just beyond the walls. Ali's wrapped hands clenched into fists as he processed what the agent was really saying. "You want me to be your informant? I want you to do the right thing." Agent Reyes reached into her blazer and produced a small recording device, no bigger than a cigarette lighter. "This conversation is being documented, Mr. Hassan. Every word Caruso said, every threat he made, it's all evidence. but we need your cooperation to make it stick in court. Ali stared at the device, understanding with crystalline clarity that his ordinary world had just shattered completely. The choice he'd thought he was facing, take the money or fight with integrity, had been an illusion. There was no going back to the simple life of an underground boxer trying to save his mother. He was now a witness in a federal investigation, whether he wanted to be or not. What happens to my mother? The question came out barely above a whisper. Agent Reyes's expression softened slightly. Immigration has no interest in breaking up families, especially when one member is cooperating with a federal investigation. Your mother's medical situation can be accommodated. Accommodated. Ali tasted the word like poison. Another bureaucratic promise from another badge-carrying stranger. And if I don't cooperate? Then Detective Caruso continues to terrorize immigrants across Brooklyn until someone gets hurt or killed. She paused, letting the weight of that settle. This isn't just about you anymore, Mr. Hassan. Caruso's threatened dozens of people like you, people who can't fight back, who have no legal recourse. You have a chance to stop him. Thunder exploded overhead, so close that the building's metal frame vibrated. In that sound, Ali heard something like destiny calling. Not the clean, heroic destiny he'd imagined when he first stepped into Sal's gym, but something messier and more complicated. The kind of calling that required sacrificing the man you thought you were to become the man circumstances demanded. I need guarantees, Ali said finally. In writing. My mother gets her surgery, her medication, whatever she needs, and I want her status regularized. Green card, work permit, the whole thing. Agent Reyes nodded. That can be arranged. Ali looked at the envelope one last time, then back at the federal agent who'd just turned his life upside down. Outside, he could hear the crowd growing restless, Sal probably wondering where his fighter had disappeared to. Tony the Sledge Marconi was likely warming up in his own locker room, unaware that their bout had become the centerpiece of a federal sting operation. What do you need me to do? Agent Reyes smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. For now, just fight. Win or lose, but fight clean. We'll handle the rest. She moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Hassan? Be very careful tonight. Desperate men do desperate things, and Caruso just became very desperate. Agent Reyes disappeared into the hallway like smoke, leaving Ali alone with the recording device and $20,000 in blood money. He stared at both objects, his mind reeling from the whiplash of the last 40 minutes. 3 corrupt cops. A federal sting operation. His mother's life hanging in the balance of decisions that felt impossibly large for a warehouse in Brooklyn. The recording device seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. By accepting it, he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He was no longer just Muhammad Ali Hassan, underground fighter. He was now a federal informant, a target, a man walking a tightrope between law enforcement agencies while his dying mother waited at home for news of their salvation. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Sal. Fight starts in 15. Where are you? Ali's fingers shook as he typed back, coming. But the word felt like a lie. He wasn't coming, not really. The man walking into that ring would be someone else entirely, carrying secrets that could destroy lives and wearing recording equipment like armor that might not protect him from what was coming. He thought about his morning routine, the sacred ritual of making breakfast for his mother. Just 8 hours ago, his biggest worry had been whether Tony Marconi's left hook was as devastating as everyone claimed. Now he was entangled in a web of federal investigations and police corruption that could end with deportation, imprisonment, or worse. The envelope mocked him from the bench. Agent Reyes had called it evidence, but to Ali it represented something more visceral, the price tag on his soul. $20,000. Not even enough to cover his mother's surgery, really, just enough to make them desperate enough to consider it. Caruso had calculated the exact amount of their desperation, measured their suffering in dollars and cents. Ali's reflection caught his eye in the cracked mirror mounted above the lockers. He looked like a ghost of himself, hollow-eyed, wrapped hands hanging at his sides like dead weights. When had he stopped looking like a fighter and started looking like a victim? The memory of his first conversation with Sal surfaced unbidden. You fight angry, you fight stupid, the old trainer had said after watching Ali demolish a heavy bag in frustrated fury. Channel that rage, don't let it drive. The moment you stop thinking, you start losing. But how was he supposed to think clearly when every option led to catastrophe? Help Agent Reyes, and he'd paint a target on his back that would last long after Caruso was behind bars. Corrupt cops had long memories and patient friends. Take Caruso's money, and he'd become complicit in the very corruption that was strangling his community. Refuse both offers, and his mother would die while ICE agents dragged them both back to a Lebanon that existed only in his childhood memories. The locker room door creaked in the storm wind, and Ali found himself wondering if Torres, the uncomfortable Asian detective, would return. Something about that man's body language had suggested reluctance, maybe even decency. Would he be willing to testify against his partners? Or was Ali grasping for hope in a situation where none existed? Outside, he could hear the crowd's energy building to a crescendo. These fights drew people who'd been forgotten by legitimate boxing: immigrants, ex-cons, night shift workers looking for raw entertainment after brutal days. They scraped together $10 admission fees to watch men like Ali bleed for their dreams. Tonight, they'd witness something else entirely, a performance where every punch carried the weight of federal surveillance and police corruption. His mother's voice echoed in his memory: "Your pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses your understanding." But what understanding was supposed to emerge from this particular breaking? That justice was an illusion? That integrity was a luxury immigrants couldn't afford? That every choice, no matter how carefully considered, led inevitably to compromise? Ali picked up the recording device, its weight surprising him. Such a small object to carry such enormous consequences. Agent Reyes had made cooperation sound like heroism, but Ali understood the mathematics of survival better than most. Heroes were people with options. Informants were people backed into corners with nowhere else to run. The storm outside reached a new level of violence, rain hammering against the building's metal walls like machine gun fire. Ali closed his eyes and tried to center himself the way Sal had taught him, focusing on his breathing, his heartbeat, the sensation of his feet planted firmly on the concrete floor. But centering required knowing who you were, and Ali was no longer certain. Was he Mahmoud Hassan, the frightened refugee boy, Muhammad Ali Hassan, the rising underground champion, or something else entirely, a man caught between worlds, between loyalties, between versions of himself that couldn't coexist? When he opened his eyes, the envelope was still there, and time was running out. In 10 minutes, he'd have to walk into that ring and perform the most important fight of his life while pretending his world hadn't just exploded into fragments too small to piece back together. Ali slipped the recording device into the waistband of his trunks, the cold metal pressing against his skin like a brand. The $20,000 went back into the envelope, which he shoved deep into his gym bag. Evidence, Agent Reyes had called it. To Ali, it felt like a live grenade with the pin already pulled. His legs felt disconnected from his body as he stood, muscle memory carrying him through the pre-fight routine that had once felt sacred. Mouthpiece, water bottle, the same ragged towel Sal had given him after his first amateur bout. Each item now carried the weight of performance, of pretending to be the same man who'd entered this locker room an hour ago. The hallway stretched before him like a tunnel leading to another world. Behind him lay the fragments of his ordinary life. The simple dream of fighting clean, earning honest money, saving his mother through sweat and determination. Ahead waited something unknowable and dangerous, where every punch would be recorded by federal agents and every decision could trigger consequences that rippled far beyond the ring. Sal appeared at the corridor's end, his weathered face creased with worry. "Jesus, kid, you look like you've seen a ghost. You sick?" Ali wanted to laugh at the cosmic understatement. Sick didn't begin to cover what he was feeling. Just nerves, Sal. Big fight. The old trainer studied his face with 40 years of boxing experience. "This ain't nerves. I know nerves. This is something else." He lowered his voice as they walked toward the warehouse proper. "Someone been talking to you? Somebody trying to get in your head before the fight?" The question hit too close to home, and Ali felt his carefully constructed composure crack. How many other fighters had Sal seen corrupted over the decades? How many promising careers had he watched destroyed by men like Caruso? "It's nothing I can't handle," Ali said. But the words sounded hollow even to him. Sal stopped walking and grabbed his shoulder. Listen to me, kid. Whatever it is, money, threats, promises, it ain't worth it. I've seen what happens when fighters start making deals with devils. It never ends where you think it will. The irony was suffocating. Sal thought someone was trying to corrupt his fighter, when in reality Ali was walking into the ring wired for sound by federal agents. He was both the corruption and the solution, the victim and the weapon being aimed at Detective Caruso's criminal empire. I know who I am, Sal, Ali said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. I know what I'm fighting for. But as they approached the warehouse floor, Ali realized that statement was both completely true and completely false. He did know what he was fighting for: his mother's life, justice for his community, some kind of resolution to the impossible choice between survival and integrity. But he no longer knew who he was in any meaningful sense. The crowd's roar washed over him as they emerged from the corridor. 200 people pressed against makeshift barriers, their faces hungry for violence and spectacle. Steam rose from wet clothes as they'd poured in from the storm, turning the warehouse into a humid cave filled with shouting voices in a dozen languages. Ali scanned the crowd automatically, looking for Caruso and his partners. Would they be watching from the shadows, waiting to see if their investment paid off? Or had Agent Reyes's investigation driven them underground, leaving Ali to perform for an audience he couldn't identify? Tony the Sledge Marconi was already in the ring, shadowboxing with mechanical precision. 6'2", 215 pounds of scar tissue and calculated violence. His left hook had ended 17 fights, and his dead eyes suggested he felt nothing when he destroyed opponents. Under normal circumstances, Ali would have been analyzing footwork patterns and defensive weaknesses. Tonight, he wondered if Marconi was part of the fix, another actor in Caruso's carefully orchestrated performance. The recording device shifted against his skin as he climbed through the ropes. Every movement felt surreal, as if he were watching someone else's life unfold from a great distance. The referee, a retired longshoreman named Mickey who officiated these underground bouts for $50 and free beer, gestured both fighters to center ring. "Clean fight, boys. Protect yourselves at all times," Mickey said, but his voice sounded like it was coming through water. Ali touched gloves with Marconi and saw nothing in his opponent's face but professional focus. No recognition, no acknowledgement of corruption or conspiracy. Either Marconi was an exceptional actor, or he was as ignorant of Caruso's machinations as Ali had been an hour ago. As they returned to their corners, Ali caught Sal's eye and saw something that nearly broke his heart: absolute faith. The old trainer believed completely in his fighter's integrity, had no idea his protege was carrying federal surveillance equipment into what might be a rigged bout. The bell rang like a gunshot in the humid air, and Muhammad Ali Hassan stepped forward into the unknown, leaving behind forever the ordinary world where choices were simple and consequences were clear. The first punch came faster than Ali expected. Marconi's jab snapped his head back, a sharp reminder that federal surveillance equipment didn't provide extra protection against 200-pound sledgehammers disguised as fists. Ali danced back, his footwork automatic, while his mind struggled to process the surreal reality of fighting while wired for sound. The crowd's roar felt distant, muffled by the weight of secrets pressing against his consciousness. Each time Marconi threw a combination, Ali wondered if the recording device would shift, if the federal evidence against Caruso might tumble out onto the canvas for everyone to see. The paranoia made him hesitant, a half-step slower than usual, and Marconi capitalized immediately. A left hook grazed Ali's temple, followed by a right cross that caught his shoulder as he rolled away. The shots weren't clean, but they carried Marconi's trademark power, the kind that had put 17 men to sleep. Ali circled left, buying time, trying to find his rhythm in a world where nothing felt familiar anymore. "Move your feet," Sal's voice cut through the noise from ringside. "Stop thinking so much." But thinking was all Ali could do. Every exchange became a calculation. Was Marconi hitting harder than necessary? Were the referee's calls influenced by money? Was Agent Reyes watching from somewhere in this crowd of 200 sweating bodies, taking notes on his performance? Midway through the second round, Ali caught sight of a familiar face in the back corner of the warehouse. Detective Vincent Torres stood near the exit, his uncomfortable posture unchanged from the locker room encounter. But he wasn't watching the fight. His eyes swept the crowd methodically as if searching for threats or counting exits, the behavior of a man expecting trouble. The distraction cost Ali dearly. Marconi's uppercut caught him flush on the chin, lifting him onto his toes and sending stars cascading across his vision. The crowd exploded as Ali stumbled backward, his legs temporarily disconnected from his brain. Through the haze, he heard Sal screaming instructions that sounded like they were coming from underwater. Ali clinched instinctively, buying precious seconds while his head cleared. Marconi's breath was hot against his ear as they grappled. "You're not here tonight, Hassan. Whatever's got you distracted, it's gonna get you hurt." The words carried no malice, just professional observation. Marconi was a killer in the ring, but he wasn't cruel. He was simply stating facts about prey that had forgotten how to protect itself. The referee broke them apart, and Ali tried to shake the cobwebs loose. As they reset in center ring, he caught another glimpse of Torres near the exit. The detective was speaking into a radio now, his face tight with concentration. Something was happening beyond the ring, in the larger game that Ali was only beginning to understand. The third round brought clarity through violence. A perfectly timed counterpunch dropped Marconi to one knee. And in that moment of triumph, Ali felt the familiar rush of being exactly who he was meant to be. Not an informant or a victim or a pawn in someone else's chess game, just a fighter who'd found his range. But the clarity was short-lived. As Marconi rose at the count of 8, Ali noticed new faces filtering through the crowd, men in windbreakers despite the October heat, positioning themselves at strategic points around the warehouse. Their movement patterns were too purposeful, too coordinated to be casual spectators. Federal agents. Agent Reyes had brought backup. The realization hit Ali like ice water. This wasn't just surveillance anymore. Something was about to happen, something that required tactical positioning and exit strategies. The fight was secondary now, possibly just a distraction for a larger operation unfolding around them. Marconi came forward aggressively in the fourth round, perhaps sensing his opponent's divided attention. A crisp combination backed Ali against the ropes, where body shots began taking their toll. Each punch to his ribs sent shockwaves through the recording device, and Ali found himself protecting his midsection more carefully than tactical sense dictated. "Why are you fighting like an old man?" Marconi asked during another clinch. "This ain't the fighter I studied tape on." Because the fighter he'd studied no longer existed. That man had died in a locker room 40 minutes ago, murdered by corrupt cops and federal agents who'd decided his life was worth less than their investigations. Between rounds, Sal worked frantically with ice and encouragement. "You're letting him dictate the pace. Take it to him. This is your house." But Ali's attention was split between Marconi's increasingly confident assault and the drama unfolding in the shadows. Torres had disappeared from his position near the exit. Two of the windbreaker-wearing agents had moved closer to ringside, and somewhere in this maze of federal surveillance and police corruption, Detective Caruso was presumably waiting for his investment to pay dividends. The fifth-round bell rang with the finality of destiny calling, and Ali Hassan stepped forward to meet whatever forces had decided his ordinary life was forfeit to their larger designs. The fifth round began like diving into deep water where the pressure changed everything. Ali's vision sharpened to crystalline focus as Marconi stalked forward, but now he could see beyond his opponent's calculated aggression to the real battle unfolding in the shadows. Agent Reyes had orchestrated more than surveillance. This was a trap closing in real time, with Ali as both bait and unwitting participant. A thunderous right hand from Marconi caught Ali's guard, the impact reverberating through the recording device and up his spine. The crowd surged forward, sensing blood, but Ali barely heard them. His eyes tracked the federal agents moving through the warehouse like wolves circling prey. 3 more had appeared near the betting tables where money changed hands in crumpled bills and desperate whispers. Whatever Caruso's operation entailed, it was bigger than just fixing fights. "Focus!" Sal screamed from the corner. But Ali's focus had expanded beyond the ring to encompass the entire deadly choreography surrounding them. Marconi pressed his advantage, backing Ali against the ropes with a barrage of body shots that threatened to dislodge the recording equipment entirely. Each punch sent tremors through the device, and Ali realized with growing horror that if it fell out during the fight, everyone would see exactly what kind of performance he was giving. The crowd would turn violent. Sal would never forgive him, And his mother. The thought of her dying alone while he rotted in federal custody gave Ali strength he didn't know he possessed. He slipped Marconi's next combination and fired back with hooks that snapped the bigger man's head sideways. For 30 seconds, he was purely himself again, the fighter who'd earned this shot through 2 years of warehouse wars and midnight training sessions. But the moment shattered when Detective Caruso finally showed himself. The corrupt cop emerged from behind the betting tables like a shark surfacing in bloody water. His dead eyes swept the ring appraisingly before settling on Ali with proprietary satisfaction. Even from 40 feet away, Ali could see the calculation in that stare. $20,000 wagered against human decency, corruption betting against integrity with lives as collateral. Caruso wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, their suits too expensive for honest cop salaries. They moved with the predatory confidence of people accustomed to buying whatever they wanted, including the outcomes of fights in forgotten warehouses. One whispered something in Caruso's ear that made the detective smile without warmth. Ali threw a desperate overhand right that caught Marconi on the temple, staggering him. The crowd exploded, thinking they were witnessing the beginning of the end, but Ali knew they were seeing something else entirely, the moment when all the careful plans began to collapse. Because Agent Reyes was moving too, rising from a folding chair near the far wall where she'd been disguised as just another spectator hungry for violence. Her hand moved toward her jacket in a gesture Ali recognized from countless police dramas. She was going to make her move now, during the chaos of the fight when everyone's attention was divided. The recording device shifted against Ali's skin as he ducked a vicious uppercut. The federal evidence it contained, conversations, threats, the envelope full of blood money, would either save him or destroy him in the next few minutes. But salvation and destruction had become meaningless distinctions in a world where every choice led to betrayal. Marconi caught him with a left hook that rattled his teeth and sent him stumbling toward the corner where Sal waited with towels and desperate encouragement. The old trainer's face was a mask of confusion and growing fear. He'd trained fighters for 4 decades, but he'd never seen anything like what was happening to Ali, the way his protege seemed to be fighting 2 different battles simultaneously. "What's wrong with you?" Sal hissed as Ali grabbed the ropes. "This ain't nerves anymore. This is something else." Ali wanted to tell him everything, about Caruso's threats, about Agent Reyes and her impossible choices, about the recording device that was supposed to capture justice but felt more like a time bomb counting down to 0. Instead, he just nodded toward the crowd where federal agents and corrupt cops circled each other like dancers in a ballet choreographed by mutual destruction. "After tonight, everything changes, Sal," Ali said, his voice barely audible over the crowd's bloodthirsty roar. "Whatever happens, remember that I never wanted any of this." The referee was motioning them back to center ring, but Ali knew the real fight was just beginning. In the next few minutes, Agent Reyes would move against Caruso. The recording device would either vindicate him or incriminate him, and Muhammad Ali Hassan would discover whether a man could survive the complete destruction of everything he'd believed about justice, loyalty, and the possibility of remaining clean in a world determined to make everyone complicit in its corruption. Marconi was waiting, fists raised, ready to finish what they'd started. But as Ali stepped forward for the final rounds, he understood that his real opponent had never been the man across from him. It was the choice between saving himself and saving his soul. The bell for the 6th round tolled like a funeral dirge, and Ali stepped forward knowing he was walking into the complete annihilation of his former life. Every step toward center ring felt like crossing a threshold from which there could be no return. Marconi's fists weighted like twin sledgehammers, but they were nothing compared to the forces gathering in the shadows, forces that would either crush him or forge him into something entirely new. Agent Reyes was moving now, her path through the crowd deliberate and final. Ali could see her hand resting on her weapon as she closed distance with Caruso's position. The corrupt detective remained oblivious, his attention fixed on the ring where his investment was supposed to pay dividends. The federal agents positioned throughout the warehouse had gone still, coiled springs waiting for their signal to strike, and Muhammad Ali Hassan stood in the center of it all, wired for sound, carrying evidence that could topple a criminal empire, while trying not to get his head taken off by a man who hit like a freight train. Marconi came forward with renewed aggression, sensing victory. A straight right hand crashed into Ali's guard with enough force to buckle his knees. The impact sent shock waves through the recording device, and Ali felt it shift dangerously against his ribs. If it fell out now, in front of 200 witnesses, the warehouse would explode into chaos. Blood would flow on concrete floors, and everyone he cared about would pay the price for federal justice. "You're done, Hassan." Marconi pressed forward, his combinations coming faster now. "Whatever's got you thinking instead of fighting, let it go." But letting go was impossible when every punch threatened to expose the wire, when every movement brought federal agents closer to their target, when every second stretched toward a confrontation that would reshape everything. Ali tried to find his rhythm, to become the fighter who'd earned this moment, but that man felt like a stranger from another lifetime. A vicious left hook slipped through his guard and caught him flush on the jaw. The warehouse spun like a carnival ride, faces blurring into abstract patterns of violence and expectation. Ali's legs turned to rubber, and he felt himself falling backward toward the canvas where dreams went to die. Time dilated. Through the haze of concussion, Ali saw Caruso lean forward at ringside, his dead eyes bright with anticipated profit. The corrupt cop was counting money that hadn't been earned yet, savoring the taste of a fix coming together perfectly. He saw Sal's face crumple with understanding, the old trainer finally realizing his fighter was compromised somehow, that this wasn't just a bad night but something fundamentally wrong. He saw Agent Reyes reach for her badge, preparing to end the charade and arrest Detective Caruso in the middle of a crowd that would scatter like startled birds. And he saw something else, something that changed everything. Detective Torres wasn't just providing security. He was moving toward the electrical panel that powered the warehouse lighting, his hand reaching for switches that would plunge everything into darkness. In that moment of realization, Ali understood the true scope of Caruso's operation. This wasn't just about fixing one fight. They were planning something catastrophic: robbery, mass arrests of illegal immigrants, violence that would dwarf anything that had come before. The recording device was the least of his problems. Agent Reyes was walking into an ambush, and everyone in this warehouse, fighters, spectators, federal agents, was about to become collateral damage in a war between corruption and justice. Ali hit the canvas hard, his head bouncing off the unforgiving surface. The referee began counting, but the numbers felt meaningless. Everything he'd trained for, everything he'd built, was dissolving in real time. Mickey's voice seemed to come from another dimension: 4, 5, 6. Through blurred vision, Ali watched Torres reach the electrical panel. In seconds, the lights would go out. Gunfire would erupt. Federal agents and corrupt cops would turn the warehouse into a battlefield, with 200 innocent people caught in the crossfire. His mother's face appeared in his mind, not as she was now, fragile and failing, but as she'd been years ago when they'd first arrived in America. Strong, hopeful, believing in the possibility of a better life for her son. In this country, she'd told him, good men can still make a difference. 7, 8. Ali's hand found the canvas. His muscles screamed in protest, his vision swam with concussion fragments, but something deeper than physical strength was taking over. Not the supernatural power from Detective Torres's disappearance. This was something more fundamental, the absolute refusal to let corruption win when everything he loved hung in the balance. 9. Muhammad Ali Hassan pushed himself upright and stood to face the greatest test of his life. Not Marconi's fists, but the choice between survival and the kind of moral courage that his mother had crossed an ocean to find. The warehouse lights flickered as Torres reached for the switches, and Ali stepped forward into darkness, carrying the weight of everyone's hopes on his shoulders. The lights died with the finality of a coffin lid closing. Darkness swallowed the warehouse whole, transforming 200 voices into a symphony of panic and confusion. Chairs scraped against concrete as people scrambled blindly toward exits they could no longer see. Someone screamed, glass shattered somewhere in the distance. The organized chaos of an underground fight dissolved into primal terror as human beings reverted to their most basic instinct: survival. Ali stood frozen in the center of the ring, his concussion-addled brain struggling to process what Torres's sabotage meant. This wasn't just about plunging them into darkness. This was about creating the perfect cover for mass arrests, robbery, or worse. In the black void where the warehouse had existed moments before, corrupt cops and federal agents would become indistinguishable from each other and from the criminals they claimed to hunt. Federal agents! "Nobody move!" Agent Reyes's voice cut through the pandemonium. But her authority meant nothing in a world where badges couldn't be seen and uniforms provided no protection. Her carefully planned arrest of Detective Caruso had become a nightmare of friendly fire and mistaken identity. Gunfire erupted near the betting tables, 3 sharp cracks that sent the crowd into full stampede mode. Ali couldn't tell who was shooting at whom, but he could hear people falling, could hear the wet sounds that meant some of those bullets had found flesh. The recording device pressed against his ribs had become irrelevant. There would be no trials, no testimony, no justice served through proper channels. There was only chaos and the strong preying upon the weak. "Ali!" Sal's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, desperate and terrified. "Ali, where are you?" He tried to respond, but Marconi's fist found him first, a thunderous right hand that caught him in the floating ribs and folded him in half. Even in the darkness, the professional fighter moved with deadly precision, his muscle memory navigating the ring like a shark following blood trails through black water. "This is your fault somehow," Marconi growled, his voice carrying fury and betrayal. "I don't know what game you're playing, but good people are gonna die because of it." Ali wanted to explain, wanted to tell him about the impossible choices and the federal pressure and the threats against his mother. Instead, he could only absorb punishment as Marconi unleashed 2 years of pent-up aggression in combinations that would have dropped him even with full lighting. The bigger man was fighting blind, but his hatred provided perfect guidance. More gunfire echoed through the warehouse, closer now, near the ring itself. Ali heard Agent Reyes shouting orders that no one could follow, heard Detective Caruso's voice bellowing threats and accusations, heard the sound of federal authority crumbling in real time. The recording device that was supposed to capture evidence of corruption had become a useless wire recording the complete breakdown of law and order. A body fell against the ring apron with enough force to shake the entire structure. Ali couldn't see who it was, but the gurgling sounds that followed painted a vivid picture of someone drowning in their own blood. Federal agent or corrupt cop, innocent spectator or guilty participant, death made no distinction in the darkness. Marconi's next punch caught Ali in the temple, sending him crashing into the ropes where he hung like a broken marionette. The warehouse spun around him, even though he couldn't see it spinning. His legs belonged to someone else. His vision, already compromised by darkness, now swam with stars that existed only in his damaged brain. "Get up!" Sal's voice again, closer now but still lost in the maze of violence and panic. "Ali, get up and fight!" But fighting had become meaningless when the real battle was for survival itself. Ali could hear people sobbing in the darkness, could hear the sound of exits being blocked by bodies both living and dead. The warehouse had become a tomb, and everyone inside, corrupt and innocent alike, was being buried together. Detective Torres' voice cut through the chaos from somewhere near the electrical panel. "Nobody leaves until we find what we came for." The words confirmed Ali's worst fears. This wasn't just about fixing the fight or arresting Caruso. This was about something larger, something that required darkness and death and the complete destruction of everyone who might serve as witnesses. The recording device pressed against his ribs contained evidence of crimes, but the crimes were expanding in real time to include everyone who'd ever set foot in this warehouse. Ali tried to stand, his legs shaking with concussion and exhaustion. Somewhere in the darkness, his mother was dying slowly in a hospital bed, waiting for him to come home with stories of victory and redemption. Instead, he was drowning in a black ocean of corruption, where the line between law enforcement and criminality had been erased forever. Muhammad Ali Hassan had entered this ring believing he could expose evil and emerge clean. Now, as gunfire and screams painted the darkness around him, he realized that some battles could only be won by accepting complete destruction as the price of moral courage. Chapter 10. The Revelation. The gunfire stopped. In the sudden silence that followed, Ali heard something impossible, his own heartbeat echoing through the warehouse like thunder, each pulse sending ripples of sound that revealed the positions of everyone around him. Marconi's breathing 3 feet to his left, ragged with exertion. Sal's terrified whispers from outside the ring, Agent Reyes reloading her weapon near the overturned betting tables, Detective Caruso's labored movements as he crawled toward an exit that no longer existed. and something else. Something that made Ali's blood freeze in his veins. Detective Torres wasn't human. The revelation hit him with the force of Marconi's heaviest punch, but instead of clouding his mind, it brought crystalline clarity to everything that had happened. The way Torres had vanished from the locker room without a trace. The way he'd moved through the warehouse like he knew its layout better than the people who'd built it. The way his voice carried through the darkness with supernatural precision, reaching every corner simultaneously. Ali's concussion symptoms were gone. The stars behind his eyes had been replaced by a kind of vision that didn't require light. He could see heat signatures, could feel the electromagnetic fields generated by human nervousness, could sense the exact location of every person in the warehouse through vibrations in the concrete floor. The recording device against his ribs wasn't just capturing audio anymore. It was somehow amplifying his awareness, turning him into a receiver for frequencies that ordinary people couldn't perceive. "What the hell are you?" Marconi's voice came from directly beside him, but there was no aggression left in it. Only wonder and terror. Ali turned toward the sound and saw Marconi clearly despite the absolute darkness. Not his physical form, but something deeper. The man's confusion, his genuine love for the sport of boxing, his complete innocence in the web of corruption that had ensnared them all. Marconi had been pulled into this nightmare through no fault of his own, just another pawn in a game that transcended normal human evil. "I don't know," Ali whispered, and for the first time in months, it was the complete truth. Torres's laughter echoed from everywhere at once, coming from the walls themselves rather than any specific location. "Finally beginning to understand, Hassan? You think this was about fixing one fight in a forgotten warehouse?" The voice triggered memories that weren't his own, flashes of other underground venues, other fighters who'd shown unusual abilities under extreme stress, other federal investigations that had ended in mysterious disappearances and unexplained phenomena. The recording device wasn't just evidence of police corruption. It was part of something larger, a network designed to identify and catalog people like him, people who changed when pushed beyond normal human limits. "Agent Reyes," Ali called into the darkness, his voice carrying with impossible clarity to her position 40 feet away. "You never worked for Internal Affairs, did you?" Her silence was answer enough, but Ali could sense her fear radiating like heat, could feel her finger hesitating on her weapon's trigger as she began to understand that the federal investigation had been compromised from the beginning. She'd been hunting corrupt cops while something else entirely had been hunting her. The Department of Extraordinary Incidents, Torres's voice came from directly above them now, as if he were floating near the warehouse ceiling. "We've been watching you for months, Hassan. Every fight, every moment of unusual strength or speed or resilience. Building a profile, waiting for the right pressure to see what you really are." Ali's mother's warnings echoed in his memory, stories from Lebanon about people who could do impossible things when their families were threatened, about government programs that had tried to weaponize such individuals during the Civil War. She'd brought him to America not just for opportunity, but to escape the attention of those who saw human potential as something to be captured and controlled. The recording device against his ribs began to vibrate, its electronic components responding to whatever energy was building inside him. Around the warehouse, he could sense other people, beginning to change as well. Sal's old boxer instincts sharpening beyond normal human levels, Agent Reyes developing the kind of tactical awareness that bordered on precognition, even Marconi's natural fighting ability expanding into something that transcended mere athletic skill. The darkness hadn't been meant to hide corruption or enable mass arrests. It had been designed to create the exact conditions needed to trigger supernatural abilities in anyone who possessed latent potential. Torres hadn't been trying to rob or kill them. He'd been conducting a field test on a massive scale, using genuine danger to separate the extraordinary from the ordinary. "You bastards," Ali breathed, understanding finally flooding through him. "You've been doing this everywhere. Creating situations where people like us have no choice but to reveal ourselves. Every underground fight, every crisis that pushes humans beyond their normal limitations," Torres confirmed. "You have no idea how many of your kind we've cataloged, how many we've recruited, how many we've eliminated when they proved uncooperative." The warehouse around them began to change. walls shifting with architectural impossibility as Torres revealed the true nature of their prison. This had never been just an abandoned building. It was a facility designed specifically for this purpose, for testing, for capturing, for deciding which extraordinary individuals deserved to live and which ones posed too great a threat to the established order. Muhammad Ali Hassan stood in the center of the ring and felt his entire understanding of reality reconstruct itself around a single terrible truth. He'd never been fighting for money or recognition or even his mother's safety. He'd been fighting for the right to remain human. The warehouse floor trembled beneath Ali's feet as Torres's revelation settled into his bones like poison. The facility around them continued its impossible transformation, concrete walls flowing like liquid to reveal observation windows that gleamed with one-way glass. Behind those windows, Ali could sense other presences, watchers who had been studying him, cataloging his every move since he'd first stepped into an underground ring. But something had gone wrong with their perfect plan. Ali reached for the recording device against his ribs, and the moment his fingers touched its surface, energy coursed through him like lightning finding ground. Not the wild, uncontrolled power that had made Torres vanish in the locker room. This was different, focused, deliberate. The device wasn't just recording evidence, it was somehow amplifying whatever lay dormant in his blood, turning fear and desperation into something that could reshape reality itself. "Sal!" Ali called softly, his voice carrying impossible distances through the transformed space. "You still with me, old man?" "Right here, kid." Sal's response came from directly beside the ring, but Ali could hear something new in his trainer's voice, a steadiness that spoke of newfound understanding. "Been listening to everything, starting to make sense of why you always seemed different from other fighters." Agent Reyes materialized from the shadows near what had once been the betting tables, her weapon lowered but ready. "Hassan, I need you to know, whatever Torres told you about me, about my agency, some of it's true, but not all of it." Her voice carried the weight of someone choosing sides in real time. "I came here to arrest corrupt cops. I didn't know about this." Marconi stepped closer in the ring, his hostility replaced by something approaching respect. "You're not just some immigrant kid trying to make it, are you? You're something they've been hunting." Ali nodded, feeling pieces of his fractured identity beginning to coalesce into something stronger than the sum of its parts. The concussion symptoms that had plagued him were gone, replaced by clarity that extended beyond normal human perception. He could feel Torres circling above them like a predator, could sense the other enhanced individuals who'd been captured and broken by this program over the years. But he could also feel something else, a network of people like him scattered across the city, their abilities awakening in response to whatever signal the recording device was broadcasting. Underground fighters, federal agents who'd stumbled onto the truth, even corrupt cops who'd been forced to participate against their will. All of them connected by the same impossible potential that ran in their blood. "They made one mistake," Ali said, addressing Torres directly, though the entity remained invisible above them. "They assumed that people like us would be easier to control if we were isolated, if we didn't know others existed." Torres' laughter echoed from the observation windows. "You think you're the first to figure that out? You think we haven't planned for resistance?" The walls around them began displaying images, other facilities, other tests, other extraordinary individuals who'd tried to fight back and failed. Men and women with abilities that defied physics, reduced to laboratory specimens or government weapons. The Department of Extraordinary Incidents had been operating for decades, turning human potential into tools for those who already held power. "Look at them," Torres commanded. "Every person who thought they could use their gifts to fight injustice. Everyone who believed they could remain free. We own them all now." But Ali was looking at something else in those images. Patterns of resistance that had been building despite the department's efforts. Underground networks of enhanced individuals who'd learned to hide their abilities while working to expose the truth. Federal agents like Reyes, who'd stumbled onto the conspiracy and chosen to fight from within. Even corrupt cops like Caruso, who'd been blackmailed into participation because they'd witnessed something they shouldn't have. The recording device in his hand began to pulse with increasing intensity, and Ali realized what it truly was. Not just evidence of corruption, but a beacon designed to call others like him. A trap that could be turned into a rallying cry. "Sal, I need you to get everyone out of here, Ali said, his voice carrying new authority. Reyes, can your people be trusted? Some of them, she replied. Enough. Marconi cracked his knuckles, a sound that echoed through the transformed space with supernatural resonance. What about me? I'm not walking away from this. Ali looked around at the faces of people who'd been strangers hours before. A corrupt federal investigation, a fixed fight, a web of lies that should have destroyed them all. Instead, Torres' revelation had forged them into something neither side had anticipated, a team of extraordinary individuals who'd chosen to trust each other despite having every reason not to. The recording device reached critical intensity, its signal spreading across Brooklyn like ripples in a dark pond. Throughout the city, others were awakening to their true potential, feeling the call to gather and fight back against forces that had hunted them for generations. Muhammad Ali Hassan stood in the center of the ring and smiled. For the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't fighting alone. Chapter 12, The Road Back. The recording device's signal had been broadcasting for 12 minutes when the warehouse walls began to vibrate with approaching footsteps. Not the measured steps of federal agents or the tactical movement of SWAT teams, something else entirely. Ali could feel them through the concrete, through the steel framework, through frequencies that ordinary humans couldn't perceive. Others like him, drawn by the beacon he'd unknowingly activated, converging on this facility from across Brooklyn's forgotten districts. They're coming! Torres's voice carried new urgency as it echoed from the observation windows. You have no idea what you've done, Hassan. What you've unleashed. But Ali was beginning to understand exactly what he'd done. The consequences of every choice he'd made since entering this nightmare were crystallizing into something that terrified the Department of Extraordinary Incidents more than any single enhanced individual ever could. Coordination, unity, people with impossible abilities choosing to trust each other instead of hiding in isolation. Agent Reyes pressed her back against the transformed wall, weapon trained upward toward Torres' impossible position. Hassan, whatever's coming, we need to be ready. My contacts in the Bureau, the ones who can be trusted, they're mobilizing. But it won't be enough if this thing has the resources it claims. The first of the approaching figures reached the warehouse perimeter, and Ali felt their presence like electricity in his nervous system. A woman whose touch could heal injuries that should have been fatal. A man who could see through walls and identify threats before they materialized. Another fighter like himself, someone who'd been hiding supernatural strength in underground venues across Queens. Each one responding to the signal, choosing to expose themselves despite years of careful concealment. Sal, Ali called to his trainer, who remained steadfast beside the ring despite everything that had been revealed. I need you to understand something. After tonight, there's no going back to the way things were. They know about me now. They know about all of us. Sal's weathered face showed no surprise, only the grim satisfaction of someone whose suspicions had finally been confirmed. Kid, I've been training fighters for 40 years. I know the difference between natural talent and something that ain't supposed to exist. Question is, what are you going to do with it? Marconi stepped forward in the ring, his earlier hostility completely gone. You want to know what I think? I think they picked the wrong fight to fix. They thought they could control the outcome by controlling the people involved. But they never understood what makes a real fighter dangerous. It ain't the size or the strength. It's the refusal to stay down when staying down would be easier. The approaching enhanced individuals reached the warehouse entrance, and Ali could sense their abilities like instruments in an orchestra tuning before a performance. Each one represented a choice to finish what the department had started, not as victims or test subjects, but as people who decided that some things were worth exposing themselves to fight. Torres' form began to solidify above them, revealing something that might have been human once, but had been twisted by whatever process the department used on their most valuable assets. You think this is victory? You think gathering a few dozen enhanced individuals can stand against a program that's been operating for 30 years? We have hundreds like you, thousands, all properly trained, properly motivated, properly controlled. Maybe, Ali replied, feeling the recording device pulse with increasing power against his ribs. But you've got one problem, Torres. You trained them to follow orders. We're learning to think for ourselves. The warehouse entrance erupted inward as the gathered enhanced individuals made their presence known, not with violence or destruction, but with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of people who'd been hiding their true capabilities for years, waiting for exactly this moment. The woman with healing abilities moved directly to Agent Reyes, whose earlier injuries from the gunfire were more serious than she'd admitted. The man with enhanced perception began identifying the locations of hidden surveillance equipment and defensive systems, and the other fighter, a young woman whose reputation in Queen's underground circuits had been built on impossibly accurate predictions of her opponent's moves, stepped into the ring beside Ali with the fluid grace of someone who'd accepted that the time for hiding was over. "Muhammad Hassan," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made the same choice he had. "Figured it was time we all stopped pretending to be normal." Ali looked around at the gathering crowd of extraordinary individuals, at Agent Reyes coordinating with federal contacts who could be trusted, at Sal and Marconi who'd chosen to stand with them despite being ordinary humans in a supernatural conflict. The recording device in his hand contained evidence of corruption that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement, but more importantly, it had become proof that isolation was the enemy's greatest weapon. "Torres," Ali called upward to the entity that had orchestrated this entire nightmare. "You wanted to see what I really am when pushed beyond normal limits? Here's your answer. I'm not fighting for myself anymore." The final confrontation was coming. Ali could feel it approaching like thunder before a storm, like the moment before a knockout punch lands, like the deep breath a fighter takes before stepping into the ring against an opponent who's never been beaten. But this time, he wouldn't be stepping into that ring alone. Chapter 13, The Final Test. The facility's true nature revealed itself in response to the gathering of enhanced individuals, walls reshaping into an arena that defied architectural logic. What had been a warehouse transformed into something between a gladiatorial coliseum and a high-tech laboratory, with observation decks spiraling impossibly upward and equipment that hummed with frequencies designed to monitor and contain superhuman abilities. Torres descended from the shadows, his form now fully visible, a man whose body bore the scars of whatever process the department used to create their perfect operatives. Half his face showed burn marks that pulsed with unnatural energy, and when he moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around him, as if space itself was uncertain of his exact location. "Impressive," he said, surveying the 24 enhanced individuals who had answered Ali's beacon. "But you still don't understand what you're facing. This facility isn't just a testing ground, it's a recruitment center. Everyone who enters either joins us willingly or provides valuable data about their abilities before they're neutralized." The recording device in Ali's hand had evolved beyond simple electronics, its surface now displaying a real-time map of enhanced individuals across the 5 boroughs. Red dots indicated department assets, people like Torres who had been captured and reprogrammed. Blue dots showed unknowns, individuals whose abilities hadn't been cataloged yet. And green dots represented the growing network of those who had chosen resistance over submission. The balance was closer than Ali had dared hope, but not close enough. "Show them," Torres commanded, and the arena's walls lit up with live feeds from other facilities across the country. Enhanced individuals in white rooms, their abilities being tested under controlled conditions. Some appeared willing participants, others showed the hollow expressions of people whose wills had been systematically broken. Phoenix, Seattle, Miami, Detroit. We have operations in every major city. Your little rebellion changes nothing. But Ali was studying those feeds with perception that extended beyond normal vision, and what he saw gave him hope. In several facilities, the enhanced individuals were exchanging glances, small gestures that suggested communication beyond their captor's awareness. The beacon's signal was reaching farther than Torres realized, awakening not just those in hiding, but those who had been forced into compliance. "Sal," Ali said quietly, never taking his eyes off Torres. "Remember what you taught me about reading an opponent? About finding the weakness they don't know they're showing?" His trainer nodded from ringside. "Always telegraph their desperation right before they commit to something stupid." Torres was indeed growing desperate. Ali could sense it in the way reality flickered around him, in how his voice carried just a little too much force, in the timing of his revelations. The department had expected, isolated, enhanced individuals. People driven by fear and self-preservation. They hadn't planned for coordination, for people like Ali who would choose principle over survival. You want to test what I really am? Ali stepped forward in the ring, the other enhanced individuals forming a loose circle around him. Then let's make it a fair fight. Just you and me. No surveillance, no data collection, no backup plans. Winner takes all. Torres smiled, the expression made grotesque by his scarred features. You think this is about individual combat? About proving who's stronger? No, Ali replied, feeling the recording device pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. I think this is about proving that people like us don't have to be weapons for people like you, that we can choose what we become. The arena responded to his words, walls shifting to create a traditional boxing ring surrounded by stadium seating that filled with holographic projections of department observers from around the world. This was bigger than a single facility or a corrupt police investigation. This was about the future of human evolution and who would control it. Torres stepped into the ring with movements that distorted space around him, his abilities clearly far beyond what Ali had encountered before. But as Ali watched him move, he began to recognize something familiar in the other man's fighting style. The measured precision, the way he tested distance and timing. This had once been a boxer too. Someone who understood the fundamentals before the department had transformed him into something else. Muhammad Hassan, Torres said as they circled each other, last chance to join willingly. Your abilities are remarkable, but they're nothing compared to what we can make you become. Ali felt the weight of everyone watching. The enhanced individuals who had answered his call, Agent Reyes coordinating with federal allies, Sal and Marconi who represented the ordinary humans caught up in this extraordinary conflict. But more than that, he felt the connection to enhanced individuals around the world who were watching this moment, waiting to see whether resistance was possible or whether submission was inevitable. The recording device against his ribs had become something beyond technology now, pulsing with energy that connected him to every person who had ever been hunted for being different, who had ever been forced to choose between hiding their true nature and becoming someone else's weapon. Muhammad Ali Hassan raised his hands in a fighting stance that his grandfather would have recognized, not just the techniques Sal had taught him, but something older, something that had been passed down through generations of people who refused to be broken. Let's find out what I really am, he said. Chapter 14, The Confrontation. The first exchange happened faster than human perception could follow. Torres moved with the fluid distortion of someone who existed partially outside normal space-time, his punch arriving before his body had fully committed to throwing it. But Ali was no longer fighting with purely human reflexes. The recording device's energy had awakened something that let him perceive Torres's attack across multiple probability streams, seeing not just where the punch was, but where it could be. Ali slipped the blow by millimeters, feeling reality ripple as Torres's enhanced fist passed through the space his head had occupied. The counterattack came instinctively, a straight right that should have been impossible to land against an opponent who could bend space. But Ali's punch didn't travel through normal distance. It followed the same impossible geometry that Torres used, arriving at its target through a route that bypassed conventional physics. Torres staggered backward, genuine surprise flickering across his scarred features. Impossible. You haven't been processed. You can't access those capabilities without being broken first? Ali cut him off, pressing forward with combinations that felt like muscle memory from a life he'd never lived. Maybe that's your problem. Maybe you need people to be broken before they can become what you want them to be. Around the ring, the gathered enhanced individuals watched with intensity that transcended mere observation. Each exchange between Ali and Torres was a test case for their own futures, proof of whether someone with extraordinary abilities could maintain their humanity while using those gifts to their full potential. The woman with healing powers had her hands pressed against the canvas, somehow channeling support directly through the ring structure. The fighter from Queens was calling out observations about Torres's patterns, her predictive abilities tracking weaknesses in his seemingly perfect defense. Torres launched himself forward in a combination that existed in 4 dimensions simultaneously, his enhanced body moving through attack vectors that normal opponents couldn't perceive, much less defend against. But Ali was learning to see the way Torres saw, to move through the spaces between spaces. He caught the incoming assault on patterns of probability rather than physical contact, redirecting Torres's momentum in ways that sent the department operative crashing into turnbuckles that shouldn't have been in that direction. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Torres snarled, rising from the impact with movements that left afterimages in the air. "Join willingly, and we can teach you to control these abilities properly. Fight us, and you'll burn out within a year. Enhanced physiology without proper conditioning is a death sentence." Ali could feel the truth in those words. The energy coursing through his system was beyond what his unmodified body was designed to handle. His heartbeat was approaching dangerous levels, his neural pathways overloading with sensory input that existed beyond the normal spectrum. But he could also feel something else: the support of every enhanced individual in the facility, their combined will somehow stabilizing his transformation. "That's where you're wrong," Ali said, launching into an attack pattern that drew on boxing fundamentals enhanced by impossible physics. "You've been trying to control people like us by keeping us isolated, convinced that we need your guidance to survive, but we don't need to be weapons to be powerful." The combination landed with accumulated force from multiple probability streams, each punch drawing power not just from Ali's enhanced muscles, but from the network of support surrounding the ring. Torres's reality distortion abilities faltered under the assault, his carefully maintained existence between dimensions beginning to collapse back into normal space-time. For the first time since the confrontation began, Torres looked genuinely afraid. "You don't understand what you're doing," he gasped, his form flickering between solid and translucent. "The abilities you're accessing, they're not yours. They belong to the collective consciousness of every enhanced individual we've processed over 30 years. You're drawing on stolen potential." Ali felt the weight of that revelation, the horrible understanding that his growing power came from the accumulated suffering of others like him. But he also felt something else: recognition from those other consciousnesses, approval for what he was attempting. They wanted their stolen potential used for resistance rather than submission. "Then I guess it's time to give it back," Ali said. He reached for the recording device, feeling its energy merge completely with his enhanced physiology. But instead of drawing more power into himself, he began broadcasting it outward, to the enhanced individuals around the ring, to the facilities shown on the arena's screens, to every person with extraordinary abilities who had been forced into hiding or compliance. Torres' scream of rage distorted reality around them as his carefully hoarded power began flowing away, returning to its rightful sources. The department's greatest weapon, the accumulated abilities of every enhanced individual they had captured, was being redistributed to fuel the resistance they had tried so hard to prevent. Muhammad Ali Hassan stood in the center of the ring and felt the true nature of his gift revealed, not the power to destroy or dominate, but the ability to connect and liberate. The final round was about to begin. Chapter 15, The Sacrifice. The power flowing through the network was intoxicating. As Ali channeled the stolen abilities back to their rightful owners, he felt his own capabilities expanding beyond anything he had imagined possible. He could perceive the quantum threads that connected every enhanced individual, could feel their gratitude and growing strength as their true potential was restored. For a moment he understood what it might feel like to be a god, but that understanding came with a terrible clarity. To maintain this level of connection, to keep the network stable and prevent the department from reclaiming their stolen power, someone would have to serve as a permanent conduit. Someone would have to sacrifice their individual existence to become the living bridge between all enhanced individuals worldwide. Torres, his form now flickering desperately between dimensions, seemed to recognize the same truth. "You fool, you think you're liberating them. You're creating a dependency that will destroy you. The human mind can't process that level of collective consciousness without burning out completely." Ali felt the accuracy of Torres's warning in his overloading neural pathways, in the way his individual thoughts were beginning to merge with the voices of enhanced individuals across the globe. Already he could feel his sense of self starting to dissolve, becoming part of something larger and more powerful but fundamentally not him anymore. Around the ring, the effects of the redistribution were becoming visible. The woman with healing abilities was now radiating energy that mended not just physical wounds, but the psychological trauma of years in hiding. The fighter from Queens was perceiving probability streams that extended hours into the future, her enhanced awareness encompassing strategic possibilities for the entire resistance movement. Each person was becoming more than they had ever been allowed to be, but Ali was becoming less. Muhammad. Sal's voice cut through the growing chorus in his head, the old trainer's concern breaking through the noise of 1,000 other minds. You're burning yourself out, kid. Whatever you're doing, you can't maintain it. Ali wanted to respond, but his voice now carried the harmonics of dozens of other speakers, his words layered with the thoughts and experiences of enhanced individuals he'd never met. He was becoming their collective voice, their shared strength, their unified will to resist oppression. It was beautiful and terrifying, and absolutely unsustainable for any single human consciousness. Torres launched himself forward in one final desperate attack, his reality-warping abilities focused into a single point that could theoretically erase Ali from existence entirely. But the strike passed through empty space, not because Ali had dodged, but because he was no longer entirely present in any single location. His consciousness was distributed across the network, his physical form becoming translucent as his individual existence scattered across 1,000 connection points. The recording device in his hand had evolved into something that pulsed with the heartbeat of every enhanced person alive, its surface displaying not data but pure intention, the collective will of people who refused to be weapons, who chose connection over isolation, who were willing to sacrifice comfort for the chance to be authentically themselves. I understand now, Ali said, though his voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. This was never about me being strong enough to fight them alone. It was about being willing to become the foundation that lets everyone else fight together. Agent Reyes stepped closer to the ring, her federal contacts coordinating with enhanced individuals in facilities worldwide as the department's control structure began collapsing. Hassan, there has to be another way. You don't have to sacrifice yourself for this. But Ali could see the probability streams now the way the Queen's fighter could perceive the branching paths of possibility that extended from this moment. In every scenario where he tried to maintain his individual existence, the network collapsed within hours, the enhanced individuals fell back into isolation, and the department eventually reclaimed control through attrition and intimidation. Only by accepting the role of permanent conduit could the liberation be sustained. Sal, he called out, his form becoming more translucent with each passing moment. Remember what you taught me about taking a hit to land a bigger one. Sometimes you've got to be willing to sacrifice something precious to win the fight that matters. His trainer's eyes were filled with tears that he refused to let fall. This ain't what I meant, kid. This ain't the kind of sacrifice I wanted you to learn. Torres made one last attempt to disrupt the network, pouring his remaining power into an attack designed to sever the connections between enhanced individuals. But he was fighting against something that no longer depended on any single point of failure. Ali had become the network's foundation, but he was no longer its only support structure. Each person connected to the system was learning to maintain their own piece of the greater whole. Muhammad Ali Hassan felt his individual consciousness finally dissolving into something larger than himself, his last coherent thought carrying the weight of victory achieved through ultimate sacrifice. He had discovered what he truly was, not a weapon, not a victim, but the bridge that would allow others to be free. The network held, the resistance was born, and somewhere in the spaces between spaces, the essence of a boxer from Brooklyn continued to fight for people he would never meet, against forces that would never stop trying to control what they could not understand. Chapter 16, The Resolution. The silence that followed Ali's transformation was profound, not empty, but full of potential, like the moment between a boxer's knockout punch and the referee's count. In the ring where Muhammad Ali Hassan had made his ultimate sacrifice, reality seemed to be catching its breath, adjusting to accommodate something that had never existed before. Sal was the first to break. The old trainer dropped to his knees beside the canvas where Ali's physical form had last stood, his weathered hands pressed against the surface as if he could somehow reach through the fabric of space to touch his fighter one more time. The tears he'd been holding back finally came. each one carrying the weight of a man who had watched too many young boxers take punishment they couldn't recover from. 30 years I've been in this business, he whispered to no one in particular. Never lost a fighter like this. Never lost one to something I can't even understand. But even as Sal grieved, something extraordinary was happening around him. The enhanced individuals in the facility were no longer just accessing their restored abilities. They were learning to coordinate them, to support each other in ways that amplified everyone's capabilities without burning out any single person. The woman with healing powers found she could channel her gift through others, multiplying its reach. The fighter from Queens discovered her predictive abilities worked better when she shared the computational load with enhanced individuals across the globe. Agent Reyes stood at ringside, her communication devices lighting up with reports from federal facilities worldwide. The department's command structure is collapsing, she announced to the assembled group. Facilities in 12 countries are reporting that their enhanced detainees have broken free simultaneously. Whatever Hassan did, it wasn't limited to just this location. Torres, his reality-warping abilities now reduced to barely perceptible flickers, slumped against the turnbuckles with the defeated expression of a man whose entire worldview had been shattered. "You don't understand what you've unleashed," he said, though his voice carried exhaustion rather than threat. "Enhanced individuals without proper oversight, without control mechanisms. It'll be chaos." The enhanced woman stepped forward, her healing ability still radiating gentle warmth throughout the arena. "Maybe chaos is better than cages," she said simply. "Maybe people like us were never meant to be controlled by people like you." As if summoned by her words, a new presence made itself known in the space. Not visible exactly, but felt. A consciousness that carried familiar cadences, the spiritual rhythm of someone who had learned to think with his fists and fight with his heart. Ali wasn't gone. He had become something else, something distributed across every enhanced individual who chose connection over isolation. Through the network he had created, his essence touched each person present. To Sal, he offered the comfort of knowing his sacrifice had meaning, that the principles of honor and protection the old trainer had taught him were now embedded in a movement that would outlive them both. To Agent Reyes, he provided tactical information about department facilities that would help federal authorities coordinate the massive liberation effort now underway. To Torres, surprisingly, he offered something like forgiveness, the recognition that the department operative had once been like them, an enhanced individual who had been broken and rebuilt into something he was never meant to become. The path back to humanity would be long and difficult, but it existed. Tony Marconi, who had remained silent through the supernatural confrontation, finally found his voice. "So what happens now? The underground fights, the whole circuit, everything's gonna change, ain't it?" The enhanced fighter from Queens nodded, her predictive abilities showing her glimpses of possible futures. The underground was about hiding, about pretending we were normal while using just enough of our gifts to survive. That's over now. We can be what we actually are. Through the network, Ali's distributed consciousness offered a vision that reached each person according to their understanding. No more enhanced individuals forced into hiding or compliance. No more children discovering extraordinary abilities and believing they had to choose between suppression and weaponization. Instead, a connected community that could support its members, teach them control, and help them find ways to use their gifts that honored both their humanity and their potential. Sal slowly rose to his feet, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "He would have liked that," he said. "Kid always wanted to use his gifts to help people, even when he was just throwing punches for money." The old trainer looked around the transformed arena, seeing the enhanced individuals already beginning to organize, to plan, to build something better than what they'd lost. His fighter was gone, but the principles Muhammad Ali Hassan had died defending were alive in every person touched by the network he'd created. Outside, dawn was breaking over Brooklyn, its light streaming through the arena's impossible architecture. The rain had finally stopped. The immediate war was over. The real work was just beginning. Chapter 17, The Return. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Sal Martinelli stood in the doorway of a gymnasium that existed in 3 dimensions simultaneously, watching enhanced children learn to control abilities that would have once marked them for imprisonment or worse. The space had been constructed using principles that Torres, now working reluctantly with federal authorities, had helped design architecture that could accommodate powers that bent reality without breaking it. "You coming in, old man, or you gonna stand there all day?" The voice belonged to Maria Santos, the healer who had become something like a coordinator for the new network. Her abilities had evolved far beyond simple wound mending. She could now sense the emotional and psychological state of every enhanced individual within a 50-mile radius, helping to prevent the kind of dangerous isolation that had once made people like them vulnerable to department recruitment. Sal stepped inside, still marveling at how the space felt bigger than it looked, how the walls seemed to pulse gently with the collective heartbeat of the people training within them. "Still getting used to all this," he admitted. 30 years of normal boxing, then suddenly everything I thought I knew about physics goes out the window." Maria laughed, the sound carrying harmonics that somehow reached every person in the facility, a subtle reminder that they were connected, supported, never truly alone. Normal was overrated anyway. The old trainer made his way to a ring where a teenager was sparring with light constructs that materialized from his own nervous energy. Unlike the underground fights Sal remembered, this wasn't about hiding or suppressing abilities. It was about integration, learning to be fully human and fully enhanced simultaneously. The kid's technique was rough, but his heart was in the right place. Ali would have appreciated that. "How's he doing?" Sal asked the teenager's instructor, a former department operative who had chosen rehabilitation over incarceration when the enhanced liberation began. "Better than expected," the instructor replied. "Most of the kids who come to us have spent years believing they're broken or dangerous, learning that their abilities can be gifts instead of curses. It takes time." Through the network, Sal felt a familiar presence touch his consciousness. Not intrusive, never forced, but available like a warm hand on his shoulder during a difficult corner conversation. Ali's essence had evolved since that night in the arena, becoming less individual personality and more guiding principle. But the core of who he had been remained recognizable. The fierce protectiveness, the refusal to let anyone fight alone, the bone-deep belief that strength meant lifting others up rather than pushing them down. "You're doing good work here," the presence seemed to convey, though the communication came through feeling rather than words. "These kids need someone who understands what it means to train without losing your humanity." Sal nodded, not caring if anyone saw him responding to empty air. The enhanced individuals here had long since stopped judging anyone for seeming to talk to themselves. They understood that consciousness could take forms that ordinary perception couldn't quite grasp. Across the gymnasium, Agent Reyes was coordinating with international law enforcement agencies that were still struggling to adapt to a world where enhanced individuals no longer hid their abilities. The transition hadn't been smooth. There had been incidents, misunderstandings, people drunk on newfound power who needed to be reminded that liberation didn't mean abandonment of responsibility. But the network Ali had created proved surprisingly effective at self-regulation, enhanced individuals supporting and correcting each other in ways that no external oversight could have achieved. Sal, the voice belonged to another familiar figure, Tony Marconi, who had become something unexpected in the months following the liberation. No longer just a fighter, he had emerged as a spokesperson for enhanced individuals who chose to work within existing systems rather than replace them entirely. "You got a minute?" The old trainer walked over to where Tony stood with a small group of adults who radiated the particular tension of people still learning to control abilities that had manifested later in life. Stress-activated enhancements, the network called them, individuals whose powers only emerged under extreme pressure, like Ali's had. "These folks are having trouble with integration," Tony explained. "Their abilities only show up during crisis situations, but that means they can't practice control when they actually need it." Sal studied the group, recognizing something he'd seen countless times in young fighters who were afraid of their own power. "What they need isn't practice," he said after a moment. "They need to understand that strength isn't about what you can do when you're angry or scared. It's about who you choose to be when you have the power to choose anything." As if responding to his words, the network pulsed with approval, Ali's distributed consciousness offering support to the struggling individuals through every enhanced person present, not taking over, not solving their problems for them, but providing the foundation of connection that made individual growth possible. Outside, Brooklyn continued its transformation. Enhanced individuals walked openly through neighborhoods where they had once hidden, their abilities contributing to community projects that would have been impossible before the liberation. The underground boxing circuit had evolved into something unprecedented, sporting events where enhanced and non-enhanced humans competed together, celebrating capability rather than concealing it. Sal looked around the gymnasium one more time, seeing the future that his fighter had died to create taking shape in every corner. Muhammad Ali Hassan was gone, but he had never truly left. He lived in every enhanced individual who chose connection over isolation, in every child who learned that being different meant being valuable, in every moment when someone with extraordinary abilities used them to lift others up. The old trainer smiled, feeling his fighter's presence like sunlight on his shoulders. The kid had come home at last, not to a single body or a single place, but to a world where people like him could finally belong. Chapter 18, The New Beginning. 2 years had passed since the night everything changed, and Sal Martinelli found himself standing once again in the doorway of the gymnasium that defied conventional physics. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood his granddaughter Elena, 15 years old and trying very hard to pretend she wasn't nervous about being here. "So this is where it all happened?" she asked, her voice carrying the particular mix of awe and skepticism that teenagers had perfected across generations. "Part of it," Sal replied, watching as enhanced individuals moved through their training routines with a fluidity that still amazed him. But the real change, that happened everywhere at once. Elena had tested positive for latent enhanced abilities 3 months ago, part of the global screening program that had emerged from the network Ali created. Her gift was still developing, something related to emotional resonance that let her sense the true intentions behind people's words. It was a powerful ability, but also a heavy burden for someone who was still learning to navigate the ordinary complexities of being human. Through the network, Sal felt Ali's presence acknowledge the girl's arrival. The distributed consciousness had evolved again over the past 2 years, becoming less like an individual personality and more like a living principle, the embodiment of everything the underground boxer had believed about using strength to protect rather than dominate. "Is he really here?" Elena whispered, her developing abilities picking up the subtle resonances that indicated Ali's attention. "The fighter you told me about?" Sal nodded, remembering the stories he'd shared with her about the young man who'd thrown a punch that made reality itself blink. But those stories had always focused less on the supernatural aspects and more on the choices Ali had made, the decision to refuse blood money, to protect his mother, to sacrifice himself so others could be free. "He's here," Sal confirmed, "but not the way you might expect." As if summoned by their conversation, Maria Santos approached with her characteristic smile. The healer had become something like the public face of the enhanced community, appearing at congressional hearings and international summits to help normal humans understand that people with extraordinary abilities were still fundamentally people. "First day?" Maria asked Elena, her voice carrying those subtle harmonics that reminded everyone within range that they were connected to something larger than themselves. Elena nodded, suddenly shy in the presence of someone she'd seen on television. "My grandfather said you could help me understand what's happening to me." "We all help each other understand," Maria replied gently. "That's how this works. Nobody figures it out alone anymore." The truth of those words was evident throughout the gymnasium. Enhanced individuals worked in pairs and groups, their abilities complementing and supporting each other in ways that amplified everyone's capabilities. Children learned control through play and community rather than fear and suppression. Adults who had spent decades hiding their gifts finally had space to explore what they might become when shame was replaced with support. Tony Marconi jogged over from where he'd been working with a group of stress-activated enhanceds, his role as community liaison having evolved into something like enhanced social work. The underground boxing circuit still existed, but it had transformed into public exhibitions where ordinary and extraordinary humans competed side by side, celebrating human potential in all its forms. "Sal, good to see you, old man. And this must be Elena." Tony's natural warmth put the teenager at ease immediately. Your grandfather's told us a lot about you. Says you've got questions about what it means to be enhanced. I guess, Elena said, then caught herself being evasive. Her developing abilities made dishonesty uncomfortable. She could sense her own insincerity as easily as other people's. Actually, I'm scared. What if I can't control it? What if I hurt someone? The question hung in the air for a moment, touching something deep in everyone present. They had all faced that fear, all wrestled with the terrible possibility that their gifts might become weapons despite their best intentions. Through the network, Ali's essence responded with something that felt like gentle laughter, not mocking but warm with recognition. His distributed consciousness touched each person present, carrying a message that came through feeling rather than words. The fact that you're afraid of hurting people is exactly why you won't. Sal put his hand on his granddaughter's shoulder, feeling the weight of everything that had brought them to this moment. The corrupt cops who had tried to buy Ali's integrity, the department operatives who had sought to weaponize people like Elena, the underground fights where enhanced individuals had hidden their true selves, the supernatural confrontation that had shattered one world and birthed another. You know what your grandfather taught me? Elena asked, surprising everyone by addressing the air where Ali's presence felt strongest. The network hummed with curious attention. He said being strong isn't about what you can do to other people. It's about what you're willing to do for them. Elena looked around the gymnasium with new eyes, seeing not a training facility but a community. I think I'm ready to learn. Outside, Brooklyn basked in autumn sunlight, its streets filled with people who no longer had to choose between being themselves and being safe. The underground was gone, replaced by something unprecedented, a world where extraordinary was simply another way of being human. In the ring where Muhammad Ali Hassan had thrown his last punch, children laughed as they learned to fly.